Hello, my name is Max Moran, and I'm going to be making a video on Battlegrounds. Now, this is more specifically on Battlegrounds Competitive. Now, the competitive scene Battlegrounds has not a very big scene currently. We've had one invitation, we have one coming up in a few days. It's a delicate topic because since it's a new game, you want to have good ideas, and you don't want to ruin the whole idea of it immediately. So, Battlegrounds. It is a shooter where you fly on a plane, you drop out, you loot for a while, you kill people, zone closes in, yada yada yada. You're the last one alive. You win. So yeah, but the thing is, I was hoping that eventually we'd have another game mode into the game. Now there's the whole idea of races or deathmatch and all that stuff, which is I'd love that. And whenever mods come out, I'm sure we'll have plenty of that. But a competitive mode seemed like a really neat idea to me. Now, what you could do is just have a solo or a squad or duo game, and it could just be a quick play mode and a ranked mode, like how Overwatch does it, to where basically you join the match, and instead of just the match ending, you get a rank, and so you play with people around that rank, and it requires a little more teamwork, or games go a little longer, which is fine. That'd be a cool mode. That'd be neat to have a little ranked game mode, which is kind of what they have now with the statistics with the hidden ranking system, but that's not really what I was thinking. Like an actual rank you could see, and you know you're playing with people that rank. But that would be a neat game mode, but I was more interested in a 5v5 kind of game mode. Not like, because the thing about Battlegrounds is it does a great job of bringing the Battle Royale spirit of video games. You start off with plenty of options. You can jump out of the plane whenever you like with the skydiving mechanic. You can fly to where you want. You can loot where you want. Plenty of open space to find and loot, which is always a good start. And you can choose whether you want to be really aggressive or if you want to be more conservative and go for the safer loot, which is something I really want to encapsulate in a new game mode. Now, I was really thought it'd be really cool if there could be a way to kind of shrink this down. Because in Battlegrounds, a lot of the game is looting for a very long period of time and walking around for a long period of time, not exactly knowing where the enemy is, and a lot it's just downtime most of the time. You probably spend about, I don't know, maybe 5-6 minutes in total actually fighting people in a solo game. Probably not even that really, unless you get down to the very end and you get stuck in the middle zone. Besides that, the point what I was trying to make is I'd like to somehow make the action more compact, make a really neat game mode for everyone can play. It's a 5v5. You can random queue or you can queue with a bunch of your teammates, and hopefully it could be a really cool game mode. Now, I want to talk to you all about that game mode, not just give examples. First, there are a lot of different things you have to touch base on, whether it is mechanics, a little different, the map first of all, which is a very big thing, weapon balance, spawn times and all that stuff, which I want to touch into all of. But first thing I want to talk about is the map. Now, the map I was thinking is it's kind of hard to explain. The map is delicate because what could happen is you could make your own map basically. Like Battlegrounds could be, oh, I like this competitive idea, and they could just make their own map. That would be just dandy, that could work perfectly. But I wanted, based on the map we have now, I was trying to think of a competitive sort of environment that would work well. I apologize if I ramble. I have trouble talking sometimes. Regardless, though, first thing I want to touch on is the map, which I was saying. The first idea I had was which would be the best environment to have a game. Now, this is about a month ago when I was first thinking about this. Which is the best town to have a game in? Now, the first thing that came to mind was Georgia-Pool. Now, Georgia-Pool is a great little town. It has really neat, because it's balanced, too, because you have the north side with plenty of apartments and loot, and you have the south side with the crates and the other residential area, which is plenty of loot. Which makes it very balanced, so you could have, for example, you could have Team A spawn at the top, and you can have Team B spawn at the bottom. Now, that would just make sense, having, and each team would have a fair amount of time to loot, and then they try to kill each other. And I was originally thinking you could do a cool thing where the middle of the zone or the middle of the bridge would be a capture zone, and you have to work your way along through all the cover, get to the middle and uncontested, hold it for a minute, or you wipe out the whole squad, and that's the end of a round. Which was neat to me, but the problem is it really limited the fighting ability and only captured just very little aspects of the actual game. And so I was trying to come up with a better map. So I figured I should ditch the whole idea of having a single town kind of format, because this works well, because then you could have the single town format allows you to split up the loot pretty evenly. You don't have to worry about, like, you have 5 people on each team and they all get their own loot, you know, and they all get to sort out, figure it out how they want, and then attack the bridge. But the problem is the combat. It would just be along the bridge and sniping across the river. If you got a scope, you'd be a much bigger advantage, and so that was a big problem for me. So that's why I wanted to touch on the whole map, or a complete version of the map. So this is the full map, and I was thinking that a good size would be, this might be a little crazy, and there's lots of ways to do it, and it's also not a circle, which I struggled with for a long time, but a sort of shape like this. Now, that's a little weird at first when you think about it, but it actually has a lot of balance to it, and with the gun spawns that you can change in the game mode, I think it could be really neat to have, first off, each team, so you'd have Team A spawn over near George Bull, and Team B spawn over in Yaseen. Now that makes sense. Each team has their own big city to navigate to, and now there's the whole factor of finding different places to loot. So, for example, Team A, if you wanted to, you could I was thinking the skydive range you could be able to go to would be about to here. So you can go back to the edge of your city, and you could find a car on the outskirts, or you shouldn't be able to go that far, because then you could fly all the way to Roshawk or 70 or something, which seems ridiculous to me. So you should start kind of low. I wasn't thinking you jump out of a plane either. You would just spawn in the air and skydive, and you get to choose where you want to go out of this kind of pie-shaped piece. Now, the reason you could do the map like this, and I think would be much better, is one, you get the whole aspect of Battlegrounds with the wide open space technique. You don't get a bunch of really small engagements, like for example the bridge. That's not a super fun place to have combat on. It's kind of boring and unfair, whoever gets there first. But with this kind of layout, with a huge map, several kilometers for everyone to fight on, it gives much more much more of a varying environment. For example, if you wanted to, you could find a car and go all the way to 70 and get better loot there. Or you could drive to Roshawk, or you could drive to the ruins, or Waterworld, or the school, or the shooting range. It's all is up to you, which makes the whole idea of a bigger map make more sense, because you have more options to focus on. You can't just go loot the same buildings you'd always loot. I was trying to think when I was thinking of the idea of the map, what is the best way to do loot? Now, loot is it's particular, because you want to make it fair to where you don't get nothing in the first place you go to, and you don't get super overpowered things in the middle. You want to make it a pretty, just everyone kind of has the same advantage, and everyone can get to the loot, and it's not a huge disadvantage based on where you spawn. So if Yaseen was able to get AWMs in Roshawk, George Bull had the same, technically could still get there, but it's closer to Yaseen, which would make it unfair. Now, we have Team A and George Bull, and we have Team B and Yaseen. Now, I was thinking how loot would work is you could take, as the farther you go into the middle of the diamond, the better the loot would get. So, for example, shooting range would have pretty decent loot. 70 and Roshawk would have the best loot in the whole map. First off, because for example, it has a it's a good city, and cities are fun to fight in. They're good to fight in. They're good battlegrounds, is what they are. And so it would make sense to have spawn points for high-powered weapons. For example, you're more likely to find scars or M4s there, AKs, or Kar98s. The scopes, your chance of loot goes higher the farther you go. So in Yaseen and George Bull, you would still get rifles. You'd probably get like 10 rifles in the whole city, maybe. You want to limit it as much as you can, so that way you don't just get all your loot in the first place you go to. You want to limit the scopes. You can get like 3 scopes in the whole town, because you have 5 people, so it shouldn't take super long time to loot it. and you have just regular small meds. Like, you don't really get med kits, you get energy drinks, maybe a painkiller. And the farther you go into the middle, the better the loot is. It's the whole idea of risk versus reward, and how it's more of a risky chance to go towards the middle, but you get more loot if you go to the middle. That was the whole concept of that. And that's the next thing I wanted to talk about is the zone. Now, what's it called? Okay, so the zone, or how, because in a regular game you have the classic circle moving in, and that's the difference I had with this. Is a circle could make sense here, where you could go like this, but it just won't look very good. You know, come on, looks are everything, and because we live in America, or I live in America, and so I wasn't sure how to do the zone to where it would be fair for all it to close in slowly. And the problem is, if you did it to where it was really uniform, to where whenever the zone closed in, it would do the same every time, which would just not be a good idea, because then it could just go in, and if the circle always closed in the same exact spot, everyone would just get to that spot and hold down in those houses. It would be pretty stupid. So I figured the best option was to, you have your first zone, you have like 3 or 4 minutes before or you have about 30 seconds before the zone is revealed, and the first zone is always going to be the same. It's this first zone, the green triangle, or diamond, or whatever. It's a solid zone. It gives you plenty of options to go wherever you want. It's good. Now the second zone, it can go back to a circle now since it's within size. Both towns, I think, should be out of the zone by now. So that way you can't just sit in your town and snipe from a distance or keep looting. I think you should be forced to go towards the middle in the second zone, which should take about 4 minutes or so, or 5 maybe, depending on how fast it takes to loot. And both teams should be forced into these new areas. Now, from here on out, the green and the purple, these are 2 zones that will always stay the same. These don't change, because I figured this was the best way to make it a fair fight for everyone. Because if you made it to where the first zone was the same, but then the second zone could be anywhere, it could be where it's all Georgia Pool or somewhat, or it's only in Yaseen, which would just make one team at a huge disadvantage. Which I feel that making this one circle all fair would make all of the circles that come after it a little less infuriating. So that means the next circle could be over in the top in the northwest, or it could be down in Roshawk, or it could just straight just be it could be smack dab in the middle of the circle. You know, all sorts of little parts of the circle could make all sorts of little environments, which is another thing about Battlegrounds, is I wanted to encapsulate as well is how each fight you get into, each game you have memories of the game. It can be a very good game too, and you know, like, whenever you walk by a certain place, like the broken down plane or the mansion in Yasmia or the prison or whatever, you'll know that you had a fight there, and you won a game there, or your friend shot you in the face there. You know, all sorts of little things that really, that's part of one reason I really like about Battlegrounds is the map and what you're able to do with that. So currently we have talked about the map, the spawning, the zone. I wanted to talk a little bit about skydiving. I know I talked about it for a second. I want to talk about it a little more. I was figuring that the best possible skydiving limit, and I said this earlier, was just to the edges of the city. And so how you would do that is you would just spawn in the air. Each team would spawn in the air, and you'd spawn at like a very like a couple hundred meters in the air, which would give you just enough distance to get to here if you pulled your chute immediately or just flew straight, or trying to make it to where you can't just fly all the way to Roshawk and get all the good loot, but make it to where you go far enough to where if you want to get a car and go for a quick 70 or somewhat, you could do that. Next, that's parachuting. We talked about weapons a little bit. I figured, supply drops. That's what I wanted to talk about. Yes, supply drops. It's a interesting part of the game because it's hard to balance, especially in a competitive mode. So it's the whole idea of risk reward once again. It makes sense because you could have the circle and then you have just a plane fly by that's like and it drops the supply drop right here. Everybody gets it. It's great. Yeah, it's death trap. It's the whole process of having a random drop, and you should get whatever it's inside. I think the weapons that should be inside that are currently in the game should be the MK14, the AWM, the M24, the Groza, and I think that's it. I think that's all the weapons, unless I'm forgetting one. I think that's it. I think those are all the weapons that should spawn in the crates. The M249 and the Tommy gun, and the Car 98 shouldn't even be in the crates at all, I don't think. So all those guns should all spawn, I believe, in Severny and Rozhawk, which would make really interesting. And I keep saying interesting, makes you really want to go to those cities because you know they have good loot. So I think Tommy guns, M249s, and Car 98 should all spawn in these places. I don't think a Car 98 should spawn in Yaseen or Georgepol, and if they do, it should be a very low chance of it happening. I wanted to talk about some little mechanics of the game. I've talked about all sorts of rules and whatnot. First person is a given to me. I could explain it, but I'd rather just let Summit explain it because I feel like he does a better job at it. And I wanted to talk about about the red zone. I don't think the red zone should be allowed in a competitive scene because it's just such a random factor. And I know it can add spice to the game, but one person getting bombed by the red zone, having to revive them, isn't exciting gameplay to watch or play. The red zone just seems kind of like a dumb mechanic to me, to be honest. I understand why it's in the game, but it just doesn't, in a competitive scene, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And that's pretty much the whole concept of my idea. And one last thing is switching sides. For example, in Counter-Strike, which I play a lot of, you switch sides at halftime. And we could do that, but the thing is, there's a score as a factor. Now, the round would end where one team is left alive. So if you have the round ends and there's 2 people on the red team and there's 0 people on the blue team, the red team wins. That's pretty given. So I was thinking there were a few ways you could do the scoring system. You could have 2 rounds, and a way you could do it is team A starts in Georgepol, team red would start in Georgepol, and they get 5 players. And team blue would start in Yaseen, and they would get 5 players. Now, at the end of the game, there will be a certain amount of players left. So, let's say blue team has 3 people left, and red team gets 0. The game ends when one team runs out of players, which makes sense. That's how the regular game works. And so how you could do it is at halftime, when they switch sides, if red only wins the game, but they only have 2 people alive, then the blue team would win. I figured that was a good way to do it because it could make because the problem was if it's just when a team wins, you might have to play a bunch of overtime matches, because if you have one team win on Georgepol and then one team wins on Yaseen, and they just reverse that repeatedly, it's no good way to do a scoring system. So if there's 1 person alive compared to 5 people alive, that's a big win. To have 5 people last the whole game, like the last circle, compared to 1 person in a 1v1 last the whole game. So I think that's a good way to score the game, is to win. So there's a halftime, so you play, it's just random who spawns where. So Team A would spawn Georgepol. If they win the half with 2 people alive, and then B team, they switch sides, and B team starts in Georgepol, they win the half with only 1 alive, then red team would win. Which I feel like that's fair, because it makes everyone has their own chance of winning. There's no unfair type of scenario that's put into play. And I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. And after the game's over, if you both say you both have 3, so say one team gets 3 on one side, one team gets 3 on the other, 3 dead and 3 dead. Say that you tie, basically. You play an overtime match where it's basically just a random spawn of which city you're going to go at. Which there's some argument of why that would be unfair, but just tell me in the comments. Ooh, it's getting a long video. And that's pretty much the last thing I wanted to talk about. I doubt anybody watched to the end of this video. And if you did, thank you for watching. And I know I'm going to get some hate in the comments, but who cares? I wanted to make this video for a long time. It was my idea. It probably will never be in the game, but I think it could be really neat to do this. Yeah, that's it. Thank y'all for watching.